Hi, everyone. Welcome to our first Growth from Home virtual session. I'm Jake Skinner, the CEO of Growth, and we are very lucky today to have for the first part of our session, Lewis Koski, the COO of Metrc. Lewis, thanks for joining us.
Oh, thanks for having me, Jake.
Yeah, we're really excited. So I think, would love to hear a little bit about your background. I know, you're a former policy guy, so we'd love to talk a little bit about how you got to Metrc, and then I'd love to break into kind of the meatier stuff around 2020 and then 2021.
Hey, that sounds great. So again, appreciate the opportunity to be here, Jake. Again, I'm Lewis Koski. I'm currently the Chief Operating Officer for Metrc LLC, which is a leading provider of seed to sale software for government agencies across the country. Prior to that position, I was in the early years of cannabis legalization, a government executive in the state of Colorado, or as one of the first directors of the Marijuana Enforcement Division shortly after we legalized cannabis for adult use sales. So I was part of the process of creating public policy around cannabis legalization, both working at the legislature and primarily responsible for putting together the regulations that were ultimately promulgated in the state. A couple of years before I came to Metrc, I had left the state and I had a small consulting firm where I traveled around the nation and sometimes the world talking to government agencies and working with them on implementing best practices in cannabis policy. And then came to Metrc in 2019 and have been there ever since and hope to be here for quite some time.
Amazing. And I think, it's we're so excited to have you today because I think, Metrc occupies this really unique space in the cannabis industry where, the seed to sale technology has really become what regulators are using to, serve their licensees, serve their patients, really understand where the plant is going from, its initial kind of planting to consumers and patients. So, I know Metrc is now, correct me if I'm wrong, you're in 15 different states plus District of Columbia now with Oklahoma and West Virginia. So in terms of coverage in the US, that's pretty amazing. I guess, the data isn't necessarily yours. I guess, could you explain a little bit about how Metrc works with these state governments? And then also, if there are any interesting kind of trends or particular macro things that you can share with us that you saw at the end of 2020 that are pretty interesting about the space.
Yeah, you bet. So think of Metrc as a centralized database system that sits right in the middle of the regulatory framework, and it's administered by the state. So whatever the regulatory agency is really the one responsible for administering the system. And licensees, being in the industry, they take inventory data from cultivations, infused product manufacturers, transfers between those and distributors, storefronts, testing facilities. All that data gets tracked as it moves through the stream of commerce from the time it's a little baby plant all the way to the time it's a product, finished product sold at the point of sale. So our system kind of sits right in the middle of the regulatory framework, and data is collected on movement through the supply chain. Now, you mentioned earlier, too, that the data is owned by the states, and that's accurate. The states contract with Metrc. We help them collect all the data for them to do their monitoring activities, enforcement activities, and whatnot. And they actually own the data and control the data that is put into our system. They use it for a number of different reasons. We've seen them use it for, kind of more at the micro level to work with businesses in the industry to make sure that they're in compliance. So kind of a monitoring activity. But we've also seen them take that data and aggregate it and report out to the population writ large about things that they're seeing in the industry, trends that they see with certain products. And of course, that's different from one jurisdiction to the next, but it equips basically every layer of government with an incredible data set for them to be able to help monitor licensees, but also inform future decision-making, whether that's new policy or whatever the case might be.
Yeah, it's been really incredible to see. Even on the technology side, that's not the ones that aren't contracting with the state, right? A Metrc API integration is almost essential, right, for a lot of these people to really get that clarity. And so, that's to me what's more interesting about cannabis is that you have a lot of these nascent industries that have really explosive growth, but you're not really able to capture what are the trends, what's happening at the real kind of micro level. So, that's what I always tell people is super interesting about cannabis. We already have this technology that's covering a lot of these major markets that's really giving us this granular data that we really have never seen before. So it's been pretty incredible to watch that.
Yeah, you'd mentioned too, just like what were some of the trends that we were seeing towards the end of 2020, coming into 2021. A lot of our focus from 2020 into 2021 was still kind of the ramifications or the dynamics that we're facing now with COVID continuing to persevere over a pretty significant period of time. And on the early days of the pandemic, we saw states and the industry reacting pretty swiftly, first to get the essential status, and then secondarily to move pretty quickly to adopt regulations to meet some of the new complexities of COVID. What we see now is as we're leaving 2020 and coming into 2021, we're seeing that there's a likelihood that a lot of those emergency regulations that they put in place are likely to persevere, not only because COVID's continuing to last longer than I think we thought originally, but also they haven't had a lot of issues with those regulations. So it's even as we transition to whatever the new normal is going to look like, I'm hoping that it's what it was at the beginning of 2020. But if it's not, if there's not an argument against those regulations, we might see some of those regulations like telehealth and delivery of cannabis to become more permanently installed in a lot of those states. So that was one trend. And then another really quickly, a second trend was right after the impact of COVID really started to settle in early in 2020, late spring, early summer. We saw a lot of state legislatures abandon their cannabis policy because they were focused on other issues. And we predicted at the time that state legislatures would take that up again coming into the 2020 session, mostly because state coffers and state budgets have been really impacted by decrease in sales tax revenue and other income tax revenue, et cetera. So we are seeing that now. At the time, we thought it was going to be because we were on the other side of the COVID pandemic with numbers surging like they are. That has kind of continued to persevere. But what we are seeing is as legislatures get back together, there's a strong likelihood that many of those states are going to take up cannabis policy, in particular, some of the states that were impacted by the presidential election.
Yeah, no, I think that's been so interesting. And what's been cool to see too is I think we started to see some of the numbers at the end of 2020. I just pulled some, right? Like California is on track for $1 billion in cannabis tax revenue this year, which is pretty phenomenal. Oregon did over $1 billion in sales. Michigan is close to $1 billion. Massachusetts did $1 billion in gross sales. I mean, these are like very large numbers, that these states can really realize. I guess, from your side, these new states that are coming on that people are talking about a lot, right? New Jersey, New York, potentially other states like Arizona, what is, from your perspective, that kind of ramp up time for maturity? And obviously products like Metrc have a time to implement as well, right? So what do you think is kind of the watch period for these states to go from, hey, we've now enacted this, to now this is money really coming in for a mature industry? Or I guess it's kind of hard to tell depending on the state.
Yeah, no, your last point was going to be my first point, which is it does vary state to state, so it can have an impact. We've seen, let me just put it this way, more often than not, when state legislatures create the legislative framework, which also has a lot of the regulatory framework inherent in that policy, they put pretty restrictive dates on it with the intent of making sure that regulators and government agencies are moving things along and this doesn't get stalled out at any given time. So it's almost always really aggressive dates. And states to varying degrees of success have met some of those deadlines, but a lot of times it's with a much smaller market than what everyone anticipated. So I'll use my home state of Colorado, for example. When we first started legalized sales in 2014, we had probably close to 800 businesses operating on the medical side. And we had maybe 20, less than 20. I think it was actually like 14 stores that opened on the first day of legalization. So there's these long lines, there's news crews, there's all sorts of attention that's paid to the amount of demand there is for legal cannabis in a new market, but it really does take time to ramp up. So a general rule of thumb would be somewhere in the neighborhoods of 6 months to a year. It's from no market to having a market stood up is a stretch. I mean, it's really hard to make those timelines, but past that year mark, you can see states really starting to get some momentum. Sometimes that's aided by medical markets that are well established, that end up becoming some of the first players in the adult use marketplace. So a lot of things to think about there. I mean, I think one thing that's important is that a lot of the organizations operating around government have been much quicker. I mean, you mentioned, it does take time to get Metrc set up, but we can be set up in a state and have done in as little as just over 2 months. We did that last year with Maine. From the time we had an agreement to the time the system was ready to go on production was right at 2 months. And so we like 4 to 6 months. That's a little bit better, but we can do it in a pretty big hurry and work alongside government agencies that are moving at a brisk pace to try and get legalization stood up.
Amazing. And I guess too, from your side, how has the pandemic affected Metrc's ability to implement these programs, right? I mean, I know you're in the midst of implementations right now. You've already had some go live. How have you had to adjust servicing these states? I would imagine there's a decent amount of training and contact that existed before. I guess, how have you kind of navigated that time to get states like Oklahoma and potentially West Virginia and obviously Maine, up and running when you kind of have to be remote?
Yeah, well, I think one of the biggest challenges is that I can safely say that Metrc employees are people, right? So we really like engaging face to face with members of the industry, with our regulatory clients, and spending time with them in person to not only add the personal touch, which is just part of our culture and important to us, is it feels like you can be a lot more efficient. We did have to pivot pretty quick away from that, even like towards the middle of last year, all the way until now, where a lot of the meetings we would have normally had in person, you're right, a lot of the preliminary like socialization of Metrc and the road shows that we do commonly had to be done over webinar. A lot of the really kind of intricate technological work that we do with our regulatory agencies had to be done over Zoom meetings, just like we are having right now. And so we were able to adapt pretty quickly. So I think other than the fact that we were, missing that personal in-person interaction, we were able to pivot pretty quickly. We haven't seen any degradation in the amount of time that it takes for us to stand up a really well thought out, methodically approved system into production. So we've still been able to maintain a pretty high standard, if not actually, kind of improve our standard of when it comes to just the amount of time it takes to set up a system.
Amazing. And I guess too, going into 2021, I guess we're very early in the year, but what have you seen on the regulator or legislative side in terms of enthusiasm or concern? Obviously cannabis kind of rolls up into the public health domain, right? Being deemed essential. It's something that is serving a lot of patients out there right now. What's the, I would guess, excitement on that side to get these things going, or what should we be looking out for in 2021 on the legislative side that could be exciting, on a state basis? And then obviously we can kind of touch on, what a wholesale government change, is going to do for us as well, which I'm sure
Right.
is not going to be subtle, right?
Yeah. So I would bet that 2021 is going to be a pretty dynamic year. I think it's going to be a really good year for cannabis legalization. There's a couple reasons for that, I think. One reason is we saw it this year, and it's kind of history repeating itself. Presidential election years typically are pretty good for the expansion of legalization. So Colorado in 2014, along with Washington, and not too far long after that, Oregon came on to, so it was a presidential election year. I'm sorry, it was 2012. Sorry. And then and we legalized by 2014. But then again, in 2016, we saw some expansion. And then again, this year, we had 5 states that through a ballot initiative passed some form of legalization. So presidential election years are pretty good. So a lot of the hard work then begins after that. Although people who ran those campaigns might beg to differ, but there's still a lot of hard work that has to be done after those initiatives pass, and the legislature takes up the legislative component of it. And almost in a parallel path, regulators are working really hard to start addressing some of what they anticipate being the regulatory needs. So I think we'll see a lot of that this year. So that's just kind of like the basics of it for the states. I think when it comes to policy issues, I think one particular area of cannabis public policy that's going to remain front and center at the state legislatures is aspects of the policy that work through the social equity concerns that a lot of stakeholders have had, and frankly, that's something that really needs to be addressed. And doing it early on in the legislature is a really good time to take up some of those issues, because I think it becomes a little harder to do once you have an established, mature market. It becomes the number of opportunities out there may be less, although there are other states that are pretty mature that are doing a really good job tackling those issues in either rulemaking or through legislation. So they still can be done. It's just, I think, a lot easier on the legislative front. So the other thing too, I think it's worth mentioning is that at state legislatures, it's always interesting to watch how the different parties' political compass adjusts from advocating against some form of legalization, and how the respective parties have to kind of shift their priorities as they come out from a kind of let's get legalization passed to actually adding some of the details to the legislation and into the rulemaking. So it's always sometimes a little counterintuitive for lawmakers, and sometimes as a result, there's certainly a lot of opportunity we see right now to be able to help lawmakers across the country better understand, how you can make that pivot from let's talk about legalization, yes or no, to okay, now how do we institute a well-regulated market that is balanced enough that it can take into account some of the social equity issues, is strong for business, and first and foremost still provides the right amount of public health and safety regulations and statutes to address some of those concerns as well.
That's a great point. Yeah, I think the education piece is critical, right? And that's not just for constituents of a state. That's also for these politicians, right? Around, hey, just because weed is now legalized or cannabis is legalized in your state, that doesn't necessarily mean that all of a sudden the industry is going to hum along. It's going to put it together, right? I mean, you have all these different conflicting interests and all these different things to kind of move that through the system. So, that's why I think it's been interesting to see some of these states, that maybe were reticent to either have a medical program or a rec program start to think about, well, this isn't hey, once you flip the switch, you're ready to go and the problems kind of solve themselves. This is a lot of time and a lot of effort by a lot of people to really understand all these different dynamics, because in a lot of ways we're recreating these rules. And as you said, there is I think, very positive renewed emphasis on we need to get these social equity programs correct and right from the beginning, because as you said, retroactively that usually never works, right? So I think that's a great point that you brought up. And I guess, interesting on our side, I found out you got your PhD during the pandemic. The rest of us are out here, doing sourdough starters and, taking a hobby, and you're getting a PhD in public policy. I guess, what was that like? And I guess how are you thinking about that to help you on the Metrc side and, obviously speak to a lot of these public policy experts over the next few years?
Well, you know what? I first of all, I appreciate you bringing that up. Sourdough starter is now next on my list. I was going to learn to play guitar or something like that, but sourdough starter would be a good.
Definitely. You can give it to your grandkids,
Yeah.
They last forever.
I've been working on my PhD for a pretty long time, and there are a number of people, some of which might even be listening to this webinar, who have been very, very supportive of my career in cannabis, both on the industry side and on the government side, that are so happy to hear to not have to hear any longer, I'm working on my PhD, right? Because I would pretty much tell anybody with this. And so I'm glad to have that over with and done. And I do think, I was very fortunate in that as I was during that 8-year span, I was cramming my PhD in. I was able to really apply a lot of what I was learning about public policy processes, how people bring inputs into the system to try and get certain outputs out of the system, and so I've really been able to leverage that knowledge that I've been picking up along the way and apply it into the cannabis industries, and I think in some really pretty fun ways. So it's been great. I'm going to be teaching at the University of Colorado a public policy class. So I'll continue to kind of hone my academic skills, but mostly I'm going to be trying to apply a lot of what I know about those processes to Metrc's efforts to really help government be successful in implementing cannabis policy. We're pretty bullish on progress this year with states. Like I mentioned before, there are 5 states that had some sort of legalized initiative from their electorate. There's another handful of states that are also going to be taking this on independently through their legislature. So we could see a pretty significant expansion of that. And, if our track record continues to be as successful as it has been in the past, then we expect for our footprint to continue to grow as states take on the rigor of implementing legalization policy, because we stand ready to help them implement the process. And of course, too, we're always looking to improve the services that we offer as well. And so I think we can be really helpful in that respect. So I'm hoping all that kind of comes together this year. It certainly won't be from a lack of trying, because we've been fully engaged in a lot of areas, trying to help out in the same ways I just mentioned.
No, that's so cool. I mean, I think it's a really interesting way how you're choosing to slice it, right? I mean, you're going the real, I'm going to understand these dynamics completely, right? And then when you're talking to these regulators, I think it probably does help you so much in the communication to understand, I actually know what you're going through. I know what the processes are. So you're not this kind of, call it traditional technology disruptor who's going in and basically saying, this is how we're going to do things, and either angering regulators. I think it's a super cool approach that you're taking, and give you guys a lot of credit, because I think it's pretty fascinating to see the amount of states that are coming on, and really the data that we're getting from this. We're going to be able to benefit from that from a long time. So we're excited to see what comes next, and obviously for kind of part 2 of this, we're going to be able to talk to Dr. Williams about their process. And, I think from the sheer volume of licensees that have been happening in Oklahoma, I'm fascinated to hear that approach. So, we'll kind of dive in that in session 2, but thanks, Lewis, for giving us that insight.
Thank you so much. Appreciate the time.
Hey guys, my name's Amanda. It's actually my 2-year anniversary today at Loon, or my Looniversary as it's called internally. So please send all congrats to my email that will be at the bottom at the end of this video. Great. You may know Loon from us being women founded, sustainable packaging, really, really nice source products, high potency. We have our Desert Gold, our Cloudberry, our Soulberry, our Beanie Dream, and our all-in-one disposables, our infused pre-rolls, as well as the PAX pods, those half-gram PAX pods. What's new at Loon? Live resin. What? All-in-one Loon Naked live resin pen. Hello? Yes, please. I keep this bad boy in my purse. It's a really nice value for $30 to have that 1/4 gram of real live resin. So folks are loving these so far. Really great feedback there. Also in Tangy, so both live resins are Tangy this season, we have our PAX pod. If you're not familiar with the PAX battery, you should be, because it's weed for nerds. It's the best. This temperature control really keeps my Loon going, and a really, really nice hit on this new PAX Aero Pro. And last but not least, we are so excited to welcome to the family, Loon Jarred Eighths. What? Loon has flour now. That's what everyone was saying. Really nice sourced product as usual. Great product at a great price is Loon's MO. This Desert Gold sativa leaning moniker marks our first mimosa strain. Nice, bright, airy, productive weed. We do have 2 more 8s coming to market, a Soulberry and a Cloudberry. Boop. Nice testing on all of these, 24% and the high 20s for these 2. I'm Amanda. I'm with Loon. Follow us on Instagram because we have some really cheeky art on there. And you can email me at amanda@loon.co with any interest if you're a retailer or delivery. I'd love to help you out.
All right, everyone, welcome back. We're now for part 2 of our session for Growth from Home. We're now joined by Dr. Kelly Williams from the Oklahoma Medical Marijuana Authority. Dr. Williams, thank you so much for being able to join us today.
Awesome. Thank you for having me.
Great. And so you started in August of 2020, correct?
As the interim director. Yes,
Great.
I actually started last February as the deputy director here.
Amazing. And I guess what was your background kind of prior to joining OMMA?
Actually, before this, I worked in higher education. I was the institutional research director. I dealt with a little bit of everything from accreditation to strategic planning. And a lot of my position was really helping to make sure that everyone had the data that they needed to be making good decisions for the institution to move forward in the right way.
Amazing. And I guess, Oklahoma has been a really interesting market, I guess, for the medical, cannabis community, by virtue of, I think a lot of people, especially when I tell them, the amount of licenses and the amount of people that have patients that have joined in Oklahoma, it's really fascinating to see. I guess, from your perspective, I know Metrc, you kind of signed the contract with Metrc at the end of 2020, and you're now in the implementation phase. I guess, how has that process been? And I guess, what are you really looking forward to as that system with Metrc goes live?
Yeah, so getting everything ready for the Metrc launch has been really interesting. And of course, as an agency, we've had to do a lot of self-reflection, making sure that all of our rules really reflect what we need out of a track and trace system, that we're being clear with our licensees on what we need from them in that system, really getting everything ready and kind of going over our rules and regs with a fine-tooth comb, seeing if there's anything that we need to change and clarify further on either of those fronts to make sure that we're really getting the best out of the track and trace system and serving both our commercial and our patient licensees well.
Amazing. And I guess, Lewis, from your perspective, Oklahoma, each state you work with has its own unique capabilities. I guess, what has been the, kind of biggest thing you've taken away from taking on Oklahoma, and, how has the process been on the Metrc side, working with the OMMA team?
Oh, it's been great working with the OMMA, and they've been great partners with us, and we've really enjoyed working together. I always hear really positive feedback from our teams that are working with Dr. Williams' teams as well, and it's always really positive feedback. It's a really interesting market in so much as that there's a large volume of licensees, and that is kind of also augmented a little bit by the fact that it's an operational medical market. So there's some unique things that we have to make sure that we consider as we're kind of working with the state to help implement Metrc so that we can seamlessly on-ramp a lot of those licensees into the system when the time comes.
Incredible. And I guess, Dr. Williams, in terms of the data that the Metrc is going to be provided, I guess, what are some of the most interesting metrics or the things that you look for from a regulatory perspective when you're trying to evaluate the market that, you're either going to get through Metrc system or the tools at your disposal as you try to really understand this market and manage it effectively?
Yeah, coming from a data background, I'm really excited about what opportunities Metrc will really provide in that respect. We've had our licensees do monthly reporting from the beginning of the program, but really being able to identify on a daily basis live information about how much product we have, where that product is, what phase it's in, and really being able to track the whole lifespan is really going to be important for us, especially in the event of any recalls, being able to identify the location of any affected product almost instantly, being able to track it both upstream and downstream, who touched it, where was the source of the problem, and really being able to kind of close that loop when we have an issue. Just seeing the broader trends across the state, ideas about how much of our medical marijuana plants are turned into concentrate, how much goes to the dispensary just as flower. We get some of that information now with our monthly reporting, but being able to really get that fine-tooth comb through that data, understand all those different points, where everything changes, how many times does a product move hands before it gets to the dispensary. There's really going to be a lot of information there that we've never had access to before in the state. And we'll really be able to kind of tailor our programming to make sure that we're supporting licensees the way that the medical marijuana is actually moving and being used throughout the state of Oklahoma. So making sure that we're addressing any concerns or issues, and focusing on what's really happening in the state.
Incredible. Yeah, I saw a stat. I don't know if it's, this is as accurate now, but it's like close to 10,000 licensees, but 2/3 of those are cultivators, right? So I guess, in the middle of a pandemic, how has it been implementing a system like this? I think we see some states where it's maybe 14 cultivators, right? I think that what's so interesting about Oklahoma is just the sheer volume. What has that been like during the pandemic? And I guess, what have the conversations been like with your kind of cultivator licensees around implementation or just the education around how the system can actually be beneficial to them?
So with the number of licensees we have, obviously communication is really critical, but also very challenging just because we have so many different licensees. We've got some that just have a few dozen plants, and we've got some that have, tens of acres of growth. And so it's really different. And we have a lot of, especially as Lewis said, being an active medical cannabis market, we don't have that opportunity to think about what things might look like before we set up a system. We've really got to learn what things are actually happening. So with the pandemic, it's been really challenging because we're not able to go on site to as many licensees. We're not able to have, presence at as many conferences or to go and make a lot of presentations in person with our commercial licensees about what's going on and what's coming. So we've been partnering with Metrc to deliver some of those communications despite the pandemic, really trying to make sure that we, make use of every communication tool we have, whether that's direct email, social media, websites, press releases, just really trying to make sure that we're getting the information in the right hands. And as we kind of solidify what that timeline looks like going forward for, the actual launch of the Metrc system and initial use by our licensees, we're really working with them and working with our communications team here at OMMA to make sure that we're getting the word out there as best we can. And, even though we're in the middle of a pandemic, our numbers really show that has not slowed things down in Oklahoma for our medical marijuana program. Our licensees were considered essential businesses even during the most stringent phases of the lockdown. So that really allowed for our businesses to continue, and we've even seen those numbers rise both on the patient and on the business side. So really no slowdown, no opportunity to get caught up there. So it is really challenging, but we serve on nearly 370,000 patients across the state of Oklahoma. So having something like seed to sale is really important to support their safety, and also really making sure that communication is appropriate and covers everything we can. And that's something we've really got to work on and be diligent with and partner with Metrc on, because it is a big change for our commercial licensees. Instead of those monthly reports, it's going to be something that they have to touch base with us much more frequently. So really trying to get them ready, get them primed up for what that's going to look like for their day-to-day, because it's a big change.
I'm sure. Yeah. And that patient number, I think, that's what's so fascinating to me, right? In under 2 years, you have such a large part of the state who is involved with this program. I guess, what has OMMA taken on in terms of education? I've seen some of the videos on your website and being active as kind of, you can ask as a patient, a certificate of analysis around the entire profile. I mean, how has that been, I guess, because obviously with such a quick ramp up of patients, what is the focus from your side for, obviously you want to make sure that licensees are following the law and making sure that they're providing a safe product for these, for these patients in the state. But with that sheer volume of patients, I guess, what responsibility has OMMA taken on here's how you educate yourself or ask the right questions, just due to, the fact that that's kind of a quick rise that we really haven't ever seen before in the industry.
Yeah, absolutely. So really trying to make sure that our patients are aware of the resources that we provide for them. You mentioned some of the videos that we've put on our website that walk patients through what a certificate of analysis looks like, what information is in there, how they can make use of it. Really leveraging social media to get that information out to our patients, updating our websites. We're really working to overhaul our entire website right now, and we're going to put together a series of 1 or 2 page documents that talk about, how do you apply, what information do you need ahead of applying, but also some guides and just how to navigate the system, what information is out there for them. So we're trying to overhaul a lot of those pieces of information for our licensees and really get different elements of information that they might not have had access to in front of them. The certificates of analysis, I think, are a really critical piece of that because it is how patients know that their medical marijuana or medical marijuana products have passed all of the required safety testing. But it goes over a lot of people's heads. So really trying to break it down for them, make sure they understand how to use it, but also to make sure that our dispensaries know they need to have that on site and make that available to our patients, and really empowering our patients to ask for that when they'd like to see that information and give them the confidence that they can navigate that appropriately. So, we're working through a number of ideas on how to make that information more accessible. We've got a couple of those videos, but there's still a lot more information that we can get out there and help answer those questions for our patients. So we're working on a series of videos and informational documents that will help both our commercial and patient licensees really understand the different elements that they're responsible for, the opportunities that they have available to them, and how they can protect themselves in this market.
That's great. And I guess for you, obviously you're pretty laser focused on what's happening in Oklahoma and your own market. I guess because Oklahoma has created such a unique industry and has really gone about it, I would say, in a way that we haven't seen before. Have other regulators from even states that have a legal market or a medical market now, or maybe are contemplating, from the legislative side going about it, have they reached out to OMMA and tried to understand, how you're doing things? Or is that something right now you're kind of, focused only on Oklahoma? And if there's something to educate other people in the future, you'll take that up?
So we've certainly had conversations with other states, including some that do not yet have markets for medical marijuana at this time. So really, collaborating, sharing that information. We're in a few different groups that regularly meet, regulatory bodies across different states, to kind of discuss the different approaches that we've taken, roadblocks, barriers, and things that have worked, just to make sure that we're all learning from each other here. This is new. Not just for Oklahoma. We've been here for 2 years, but it's pretty new across the country. And so we all have a lot we can learn from each other. And I think that, especially in medical marijuana, it's really important that we leverage the understanding other entities have about what we can and can't do and what works and what doesn't, to make sure that this goes as smoothly as possible, because we all are learning together.
For sure. And I guess, Lewis, and on your team, how do you allocate kind of the Metrc side when you take on these new states? Do you have people that are very specific to, you are working on Oklahoma and you'll be working with their team closely? I'm just curious of of what the dynamic is on your side when you go into these things. So I would imagine it's a pretty deep dive to understand all these different nuances and make sure that, the prompt is done correctly. I guess, how does that work on your side to make sure that, you and Dr. Williams' team are kind of getting to that point that you're both happy with?
Right. Yeah. Well, thanks. We have such well-established processes right now for some of the best practices for getting our system up and running. The new implementations are something we kind of take in stride. So as we get an opportunity to implement a new system, it's a pretty straightforward and pretty methodical process that's been kind of ironed out over 16 implementations now. So so we got some repetitions, and then too, we have staff that are dedicated to states. So we might have a person who works with 2 or 3 states. And what that does is that allows us that staff member to really kind of immerse themselves within those states, the regulations, some of the political challenges, changes that are happening at the state legislature, and really be super engaged as a partner with our state agencies, so that we can be an informative source, but also really start to be proactive in terms of changes that might be coming down the pike that we need to adjust for, maybe do new development or some sort of unique engineering work to the system to accommodate those changes to public policy.
Amazing. And I guess, Dr. Williams, I know you also have kind of the seed to sale project, obviously, that's coming on. I think it's set for this spring, is what I've seen for 2021, that's going live. On the quality assurance side, obviously that's a big deal. We've seen in the cannabis industry, vapes have been, a problematic part of our history around kind of like testing there. There's been pesticide issues in the past. There's all these different things that I think makes patients hesitant or makes customers hesitant going into the market and understanding, where I want to buy. And that really is the value, that legal cannabis can provide, is that it is safe, the access is safe, and we know it's coming from trusted places. I guess, what's the work that's going on that side for your agency? And I guess what's that going to do for kind of Oklahoma patients for the next few years?
Yeah, so I think that our new quality assurance program is really exciting and really sets Oklahoma apart in a lot of ways. With the cannabis industry legalization being fairly new across the entire country, that's kind of left a lack of solid research that we can go off of in terms of setting safety standards or testing protocols, things like that. There really is a gap there just because of the history of cannabis in the United States. So our quality assurance laboratory, they're contracted just with the state of Oklahoma. So they are, obviously to have earned that contract, they have to be, really stellar in their history, in their ability to identify contaminants, the accuracy of their testing. We were very thorough in that kind of research. So what they're able to do is help us compare all the laboratories that are licensed with us across the state. One of the things I keep hearing is just how difficult of a matrix cannabis is to test in. And then again, with that lack of historical research to leverage moving forward with it, it's been a huge challenge. So to have a laboratory that works just for us, that can help us answer those questions in terms of which techniques, which machines, those kinds of things, and identifying really those best practices that we can help use across the state and encourage and tighten up the protocols. Variability in testing with cannabis has certainly been an issue across the country. It's not limited to Oklahoma. That's something that all states have been struggling with, and something that we've heard a lot from the industry, both in the commercial side and the consumer side. So really being able to help tighten up those results is really critical to just building that confidence, both on the business side and for patients. Businesses don't want to, accept, flower or concentrate to make their final product with if they're not confident that it's safe, because, their brand name is on the line there, and they want to protect patient safety too. And so really helping to tighten that up is going to go a long way. So our quality assurance laboratory has already helped us do some of those cross-laboratory comparisons across the entire state to identify those areas of variability, and also to help tighten up those protocols. There have been instances where laboratories have disagreed on a result for a cannabis sample. And so our quality assurance laboratory has been able to actually go into those places, look at their protocols, look at their process, and really help clean that up. And at the end of the day, instead of the QA laboratory results matching one and not both of them, we've all been able to come to agreement after tightening up those procedures and protocols. So I'm really proud of the work that we've done with our QA lab, because we're taking that, concern about laboratory testing and the variability, we're taking that head on and doing something about it, and we're already seeing the benefits from it.
It's amazing. I guess, so the lab itself is you're not necessarily making licensees send stuff directly to be tested at your lab, or are you? I guess, is it both, right? You're essentially testing the efficacy of existing labs, but then also sourcing product from your licensees to then see, okay, what is the profile that we're getting from this based on these three others?
So there's several components to what the QA lab is going to do for us. That first one is looking at the laboratories themselves. So they are providing them with known samples and comparing their results to what they know they should be getting. So that's the first phase. Then later on, what we will also introduce is random shelf sampling of products that are available to patients, just as that quality assurance double check to make sure what's out there is safe, and that the results that are attached to that product that is on shelves really is accurate. That will also be something that they'll do with our growers and processors to make sure that, what's out there is safe, that their laboratories are getting it right, not just on the final product phase, but also at the initial processing, concentrate level, the grow level, all those different pieces. So there's a lot that we're going to get done with the QA lab. We've gotten a really good start already, but there are other pieces coming, like that random sampling for growers, processors, and the items available at dispensaries as well.
Incredible. And I guess, will that data live in Metrc, or will that live somewhere else, I guess, for OMMA?
I am not certain off the top of my head. I believe that they'll be integrating with Metrc as well. My laboratory oversight manager has been working really closely with the person who does testing on the Metrc side and also our QA lab. So he is really facilitating those conversations and making sure that everything is right. And that all those pieces are communicating directly. But, having all of those pieces in the Metrc system would allow us to compare those results side by side and really make sure that it's consistent across the board.
That's fantastic. Yeah, I guess, and in terms of the, overall patients in Oklahoma, the questions that you've been fielding, have they been mostly related to safety, or, I guess, what's the flavor of concerns, I guess, from the constituency you serve? Is it mostly around Is it mostly around safety standards? Is it mostly around, was it licensing questions? I'm just curious in terms of the volume of questions you field. I'm sure it's a lot, of kind of what are you hearing the most from patients in Oklahoma?
So what we've probably been hearing the most lately is about license renewals. Most of our patient cards are 2 years in length, and we just hit the first round of renewals last fall. So that's been a big piece of that volume, because we do have a call center that's available for patients, for commercial licensees, for the public. So we do get a lot of questions there, but there's always that question about laboratory testing, making sure products are safe, and any concerns there. So if they have any specific concerns, about a product, they might call us, they might, ask us to look into something, they might lodge a complaint, something that we can follow up on and investigate. But there's always that question, is that testing really identifying whether something is not safe, both in terms of, all the items that we are testing for, all the contaminants we're testing for. Potency, obviously, is a big question in a medical market, because, a lot of our patients want just enough potency to be effective for their condition without being overwhelming to them, or without being more than what they really need to treat their condition. So we get a huge variety of questions, but I think just with the 2-year mark, probably most of our volume right now is about renewal from our patients. But, I feel like laboratory testing is one of those evergreen questions. It's probably never going to go away, but I'm really proud just of how proactive we're being about addressing these issues.
Totally. Yeah. And I think it's also, I mean, I'm sure you'll see too, as you add sophistication on the testing and lab side and find more efficient ways for that to get out to people, right? Like that, I think that in a lot of ways either brings on more questions or also helps people understand, hey, this is actually what I can go to my regulatory body for. Right. I think that's been really interesting to see is that, ultimately you are a huge advocate for patients and making sure that it's a safe access environment and really tracking who these companies and who these growers are involved in the space. So, I think it's interesting how you've approached being this like available body for your patients versus like, in some states, we just don't necessarily even know who these people are or what they're doing. We know that they're trying to keep us safe, but I think it's interesting, how you've really engaged on that side around quality and assurance and whatever else, just because it has been so nascent and it's been an interesting way to kind of watch how that market side has developed, which has been really cool to see. So, definitely props to you all over there. I guess, Lewis, I mean, in terms of, up and running, once Oklahoma is ready to go live with Metrc, is that something that, licensees themselves will get a lot of benefit from? I mean, obviously the benefit to Dr. Williams and her team is substantial, but I guess, in terms of the communication to license holders who have to be implementing the system, I guess, how can they effectively use Metrc to run their business correctly, or, what is that side of things that's, I guess, more commercial and not necessarily as focused on patient safety?
Yeah. So for us over, the last 5 or 6 years that we've been implementing the bulk of our states is paying really close attention to what the industry is telling us. It's been really important for us to really listen carefully and take some of, whether it's their concerns or their ideas and really putting them into action. So in a lot of ways, our system is designed to be efficient, both cost effective and efficient for licensees to be able to report into. We've had a number of smaller licenses, which I think there are a lot of those in Oklahoma, have kind of reported back to us that it serves as a pretty good substitute for some of the other systems. And then also too, we've done a lot of work with our open API so that licensees who have other systems, whether it's a point of sale system or data analytics or bank compliance software, they can use all of those and integrate pretty seamlessly with Metrc. In fact, there's probably, last time I checked, there's about 1,200 different companies that have integrated with Metrc across the country in some way, shape, or form. So, by doing that, we create a lot of efficiencies for the licensees to make sure that they get the right data into Metrc without having to do it twice, and other efficient ways to be able to do it. So we're really excited about Oklahoma because of the market and the potential for us to learn a lot from that licensee base. And we're really excited at the type of opportunities that might present themselves for us to continue to evolve the system as we learn more and they get more experience in it.
Yeah, the data thing to me is fascinating, right? I think that's what's going to be really cool to put on Oklahoma. I mean, obviously the headline numbers are super impressive, but I'm super curious to see numbers from like the quality assurance lab and Metrc to really understand, like digging in, because I do think that's what's really special about the space. This infrastructure around really tracking the data and the licensees and the regulators and the testing and making that all available, I think is something that we haven't really seen in other spaces. So, as we evolve and as the industry matures, I'm super curious to see like what OMMA is doing to, innovate on Oklahoma's, cannabis market in 5 years, right? With just insights and data that you've kind of learned from this. So it'll be really exciting to see, but very much appreciate both of you for being a part of this. And, we're very excited to have you be here. And, Dr. Williams and Lewis, really appreciate, or I guess, Lewis, do you want me to start calling you Dr. Koski as well, now that you have your PhD? I can do it. So really appreciate you both being here. And obviously, we're very lucky to have you. So thanks again, and best of luck here with a really exciting year for both of you. And we look forward to seeing more exciting news out of Oklahoma.
Thanks, Jake. Thanks, Dr. Williams.
Yes, thank you for having us.